Hey, I'm Shana Meyerson with YOGAthletica in Los Angeles, California, here to teach you the answer to the question, what is the Vinyasa anyway? You hear it all the time in class. Now, don't confuse the Vinyasa with Vinyasa. Vinyasa literally means flow. A vinyasa practice is one in which you sort of maintain as much of pose A as possible as you transition into pose B, making sort of like a dancey, flowy practice. The vinyasa is the thing you see over and over and over again that comes between plank or chaturanga and downward facing dog. Now, there are a lot of options for the vinyasa. Today, I'm going to go over all of them for you. We're going to assume you're working from the sun salutation, but the information is the same, even if you're coming from another pose and just putting your hands down and stepping back to a plank, or maybe coming to a chaturanga, say from a handstand. So, of course, if you're coming to chaturanga from a handstand, chances are you know what the vinyasa is. We're going to assume you're in the sun salutations and you just came into Ardha Navasana, which is your halfway up mark right before you take it to the back of your mat. So we've got two options for getting to the back of the mat. The first one is the one that I definitely recommend for beginners, which is bend your knees as much as you need to get your palms flat on the floor. Now, if it's super hard to get your hands flat on the floor, step back a bit, because having the hands forward a little bit will make it easier. Okay? So from your Ardha Uttanasana, you bend your knees, put your hands flat on the floor. That means don't turn your thumbs backwards. And you simply step into a plank position. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. That's the first way we get back. The second way we get back is a lot more technical. So much more technical, in fact, that I have a whole nother video on how to do that. I'm going to put it in the information section in the top right corner of the video, so you can link to that. But I'm going to just explain it very briefly now so you have an idea. So the second way that we get back is from Ardha Uttanasana. Same thing, I bend my knees, get my hands flat on the floor, and I jump to Chaturanga Dandasana. Meaning, when I jump back, I bend my elbows in the air and land in a Chaturanga position. Now, one thing that's important to note, super important, I don't jump to plank position. I definitely don't jump to down dog. Jump back is to Chaturanga Dandasana, meaning you land with your elbows 90 degrees. It doesn't mean you land in plank and bend your elbows really quickly. It means you land with your elbows 90 degrees. And if you're not comfortable with that, be sure to watch my other video, because it really goes into really tiny granular detail on how to make that happen. Okay, so we're at the back of the mat, either in plank, which we step to, or to Chaturanga, which we jump to, right? Okay, let's assume we step to plank. So from my Ardha Uttanasana, my hands come down and I step to plank. The most common thing that a beginner will do from here is lower all the way down to the floor. Now remember, you need to sort of shift forward on this one and keep your elbows tight to your ribs as you lower slowly. Okay, your whole body should hit simultaneously. Again, if you need more specific instructions, I've got lots of videos that break this stuff down. Once I'm on the floor, I just committed to my Cobra, Bhujangasana, which is shoulders back and down, elbows in, and I lift up my chest. Notice my elbows are bent. I'm someone with a pretty big back bend, and my elbows are still bent. Why? Because we want your shoulders as relaxed down your back as possible. Can I straighten my arms? Absolutely. But as I pull my shoulders back and down, It actually makes my back bend deeper, not smaller. So this is my cobra, and it comes from the floor. When you are lowering down, if anything hits the floor that's not a toe or a hand, you just committed to your cobra. Now, cobra's a fabulous back bend. Please don't think that upward facing dog is somehow better than cobra. It's just different. It's deeper. But remember that deeper doesn't mean better. Deeper just means deeper. You always want to do what works for your body. So let's say that you jumped to chaturanga, but you're not quite ready for an upward facing dog. Well, you're in luck. You can still do cobra. There's a lot of people who think that plank always goes with cobra and chaturanga always goes with upward facing dog, and that's not the case at all. So you can, if you wanted to, say you have the strength and mobility to jump to chaturanga, but up dog is too much for you. You lower down to the floor and you take that same cobra position that we just saw a second ago. Okay, so cobra comes from the floor, and you could get to the floor either by stepping to plank and lowering or jumping to chaturanga and lowering, which means I can also go into upward facing dog from both. So again, a lot of people think, oh, you have to jump to chaturanga to get to upward facing dog. That's not true at all. Up dog does only come from chaturanga dandasana. I have a video that explains the differences between up dog and cobra, and they're a lot more vast than straighten your arms and get your legs off the floor. So I highly recommend that you watch that. But keep in mind again, upward facing dog only comes from chaturanga dandasana and never from the floor. So let's say I want to do an up dog. I have two choices. Ardha Uttanasana, I step to plank, lower chaturanga dandasana, and move forward, up and over into my upward facing dog. So I get the thrill of up dog, but I only had to step back to get there. Okay? Some people can take the full Monty, meaning jumping to chaturanga and taking upward facing dog. That's actually the classical entry. It's how the sun salutations were originally created. Again, that doesn't make it better. It just makes it what it is. What that looks like is Ardha Uttanasana, hands down. So I'll jump this time, chaturanga dandasana, forward, up and over into my upward facing dog. Okay, I hope I haven't lost you yet. When I said there are many ways to do the vinyasa, there are many, many. So, from my upward facing dog or cobra, I now have two choices on the exit. We'll start with cobra because that's the more accessible pose. So from cobra, I landed on the floor. I came into a cobra. The easiest way to get back is just tuck your toes and lift your hips and come into your downward facing dog. By the way, that's the end of the vinyasa. When you reach downward facing dog from a plank or from a chaturanga dandasana, you completed a vinyasa. Okay. Likewise, if I come from upward facing dog, I can also just easily, so I lower, come up to upward facing dog, and I can just do the same exact thing, which is to say, tuck my toes under and pull my hips back, and I'm in downward facing dog. You'll see when I come into down dog, I always shorten my stance just a couple of inches. Maybe it's because I have extra long legs compared to my very short torso. But for me, to get my body in about a 90-degree bend, it helps to shorten my stance a little bit. Okay. So those are sort of the easy exits. Now, what if you want something a little more challenging? We'll start from Cobra. So, Cobra position. Now I can actually take a push-up. To take the push-up back, and by the way, if you add a push-up every time you do a vinyasa, you're going to add at least 10 push-ups at least to your practice, which really helps in building your upper body strength. To take my push-up, first I lie down. Imagine you're just rewinding what you just did. Tuck my toes, elbows tight. I press to a plank position and pull back to downward facing dog. So can you see how that's just a rewind? So it was before plank, floor, cobra, and just reverse. Floor, plank, and down dog. Now notice I don't push straight back to downward facing dog because it's a lot of pressure on the shoulders and the elbows. So we're putting in a push-up, like the kind you did when you were in first grade, except remember it's elbows tight to the sides of your body. Super important, okay? No flary elbows. This ain't the military. Okay, so now we have one more exit possibility, and that's from upward facing dog through the push-up back to dog. So we'll say I'm jumping back from my Ardha Uttanasana. Let's say I jumped to Chaturanga Dandasana, upward facing dog. And remember how we reversed before? We're going to reverse again. I come back to Chaturanga Dandasana by pushing over my toes, press up to a plank position, and pull back, down dog. Again, I shorten my stance a little bit in that transition. So, what is the vinyasa? It's the section that comes, once again, between upward facing dog or cobra. That's wrong. It's the section that comes, COVID brain, blame it on that, from plank or Chaturanga Dandasana through upward facing dog or cobra and back to downward facing dog. So let's go through some options. From my Ardha Uttanasana, let's say I step to plank. I'm going to lower halfway down because I want to do upward facing dog. I roll forward, up and over, and I'm going to take sort of the easy and pull straight back by tucking my toes and coming back into downward facing dog. Okay, another option. Ardha Uttanasana. Let's say I jump to Chaturanga this time. I'm going to go to the floor. My back isn't feeling terrific. I want to come into actually my cobra instead of my upward facing dog, but I do want to take the push up. So I lie back down, elbows tight, press up, plank position, and back to downward facing dog. Now, I don't feel like doing the math right now, but from Ardha Uttanasana, there are 4 ways that you can get into the next pose. You could step to plank and lower to the floor. You could step to plank and lower to Chaturanga Dandasana. You could jump to Chaturanga and stay there, or you could jump to Chaturanga and go to the floor. Remember, if your ending point is Chaturanga Dandasana, you're going into upward facing dog. If your ending point is the floor, you just committed to a cobra. And then going back, you can either just tuck your doe, a deer, a female deer, ray, a drop of golden sun. Okay, I'm going to spare you the rest of that song. Not the does, the toes. So you can either just tuck your toes and go straight back, or if you want to, you take the extra push-up. Remember, if you take the push-up, if you're in a cobra, you go all the way to the floor, take a full push-up to plank, then pull back to dog. If you're an upward-facing dog, you don't go to the floor. You go back to Chaturanga Dandasana, press up plank position, and pull back, downward-facing dog. So now, when your teacher tells you, do the vinyasa, you know what to do. I know that a lot of teachers say vinyasa is optional. Vinyasa is actually this. And it's what defines a vinyasa practice or an Ashtanga practice. So, my recommendation, if you could hang, don't skip the vinyasas. But there are a lot of options to make it more accessible for you. This is Shana Meyerson with YOGAthletica in Los Angeles, California. Wishing you an awesome day and many, many vinyasas. Ciao.